To stay up to date on the latest voting rights and election news, subscribe to Democracy Docket's daily and weekly newsletters above. We're living at a moment when the threat Donald Trump poses to our democracy cannot be overstated. Democracy champion Congressman Jamie Raskin is here to discuss what's at stake and how we fight back. I'm Mark Elias, and welcome back to Defending Democracy, a weekly podcast by Democracy Docket. Thank you, Congressman Raskin, for joining Defending Democracy.
I'm delighted to be with you, Mark.
Okay, so I got to ask you because, I've interviewed a lot of your colleagues and other people who have run for office, and you have probably the most unique, or at least from my standpoint, the most interesting background, which is you were a constitutional law professor for 25 years. Which I think sounds like a pretty good gig. Why did you decide to leave that to go run for office?
Well, I suppose if everything were a little more utopian and idyllic in the world, I probably would have stayed there because it is an amazing job to get to be with young people and to read and write as your career, and to take the cases that you please. But when I decided to get in it, and I started running for the state senate in Maryland, there were just so many things that weren't happening the right way. And one day I woke up and I read the newspaper that my state senator, who'd been in office for 32 years, had introduced a pro-Iraq war resolution and had been moving to expand the death penalty. And I began to look into it, and I said, you know what, I'm going to run for the state senate. And everybody said it was crazy. He said, you can't run against, a 32-year incumbent who's the president pro tem of the Senate. And my favorite story about the race is there was an article in the newspaper quoting a pundit who said Raskin's chances of victory are considered impossible when I announced. And then 9 months later, we got 67% of the vote. And then there was another article in the Post quoting a pundit who said Raskin's victory was inevitable. So I went from possible to inevitable in 9 months because the pundits are never wrong. But I like to tell the young people that in politics, nothing's impossible and nothing's inevitable. It's only possible through the democratic arts of education and organizing, mobilizing people for change. So, I miss academia sometimes. I still go back and teach when I can. I'm going to be doing actually a constitutional law class for America this year, starting in February, the last week of February. But I do think that politics at its best really is just education. It's educating people about the process and the system and the structure and then the issues and what different options are. And, so much of politics has become manipulation and propaganda and disinformation. And I really think that thinking about it as a form of education is a much healthier way to go.
Okay, well, I want to tap into your dual expertise here of politics and constitutional law by starting by asking you about the situation involving Donald Trump. So the Supreme Court has obviously heard oral argument in the ballot eligibility case. This is the 14th Amendment case out of Colorado. Based on the arguments, my sense, at least, is that it doesn't seem like the Supreme Court is going to kick him off the ballot. There is another case that is percolating before the Supreme Court, the immunity case where the DC Circuit said he is not immune from criminal prosecution. And his lawyers have now tried to bring that to the U.S. Supreme Court. Let me ask kind of a combined law and politics question, which is, what do you see as the risks and the dangers of Trump's engaging the courts around these issues and the possibility that the U.S. Supreme Court rules in ways that, whether foreseen or unforeseen? I think you saw in some of the oral argument that even some of the conservative justices were concerned that Donald Trump could misconstrue a court order in a way that is harmful to democracy. How do you see as those dangers and threats?
Well, the big picture, democracy and freedom are under siege all over the world. And they are certainly under siege in America. And, I wish uh, I could say that we had gotten through Trumpism, and the threat of authoritarianism in the century, but far from it. And, if maybe 10 more GOP senators had done the right thing when we went over the Senate
Mhm.
in the impeachment trial, we'd be in a different place, but that's not where we are. So, look, I was there at the oral arguments too. I saw what took place. Um, I had high hopes that the Supreme Court justices would rise to the occasion and really earn their unique title in the federal system of justice, that they would really think about what justice requires here, um, in the interpretation and enforcement of the Constitution. They didn't. They completely punted. That is, I don't want to overread into the oral argument, but there was definitely the sense that these people had made up their minds before they came in, and they were not looking for the proper way to enforce the clear meaning of the
Mhm.
language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. They were looking for a way to move the hot potato somewhere else and to say this is really within Congress's jurisdiction. And Trump's lawyer, who I must say was very able, um, chiseled an argument that was designed to play to their
Mhm.
sense of abdication, where he made an argument that I considered very clever, which was that even if Trump is an insurrectionist, even if that was an insurrection, he's conceding, still he cannot be disqualified by any state or by the Supreme Court, because Congress could act under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to exercise its two-thirds powers to remove the disability, and therefore it would be premature and peremptory in a way, for the courts to act, or for the courts to allow the states to act. Now, that was a powerful hypothetical built on the Electoral College system and on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. The problem is, I think, because I thought about that, I think that there is an answer to it based on the Electoral College system, which is, if it were the case, and it would be quite extraordinary, obviously, given the state of Congress, for Congress to remove Trump's disability by two-thirds. So it's a tiny, vanishingly remote possibility. But if it were to happen, a state legislature could still exercise its plenary power
Mhm.
under Article 2 of the Constitution, simply to appoint electors for Donald Trump at that point, or
Right.
to come up with some other mechanism for addressing that unexpected eventuality. Um, but the court seemed to like that. I mean, they were playing with lots of different ways of getting rid of it. I think, political question and standing, and, you know, the the differing interpretation of the different parts of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, but nobody was really looking for a way to enforce its meaning. Perhaps Sotomayor, I don't know. But, even Justice Kagan kind of let me down a bit, in her crucial question when she said, why should one state get to decide for everybody who's going to be president? Good morning, Justice Kagan. That is the Electoral College system. Like, that's how it works. I mean, were you around for Bush versus Gore, where Florida disenfranchised 400,000 former prisoners, didn't allow them to vote, and then Bush won by 500 votes after a series of other really dubious exclusions of voters?
Mhm.
That is the meaning of the Electoral College. So, yeah, join the movement to overthrow the Electoral College and replace it with the national popular vote for president. But um, as long as we've got it, I don't see how that question negates the complete meaning of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
So I want to ask you now a sort of a very sort of political take on all of this, which is that one of the things that I periodically hear from voters, when I watch focus groups or otherwise, am engaged with how people like your constituents experience politics, is something like this. They say, look, I understand he was involved in an insurrection, and I understand all the constitutional arguments, but you guys have been saying he is a threat to democracy for a while now. Why is it any different in 2024 than it was in the past. And so what's the answer to that? What's the answer to what are the unique threats that would be posed if he were to win and be in office in 2024 versus, for example, in 2016?
So it's a great question, but let me answer it with a preface, which is, what is a fascist or an authoritarian political party? And the political scientists and historians tell us that a fascist political party does not accept the results of democratic elections that don't go their way. So they will not accept the outcome of an adverse um, election. They also refuse to disavow or openly embrace political violence as an instrument for obtaining and maintaining political power. They also are organized around a cult of authoritarian personality, a charismatic figure whose word and whose will is elevated above the rule of law and the Constitution. And on those basic characteristics, the GOP today, the cult of Trump, qualifies as an authoritarian or a fascistic political party. So the threats, generally speaking, are all the threats of authoritarianism and fascism, that it will be the end of democratic self rule in the country. And of course, the attack on democracy doubles as an attack on freedom. Lincoln had that beautiful image of um, the constitutional democratic framework being like a beautiful silver platter upon which rests the golden apple of freedom and liberty, the ideals that are outlined in the Declaration of Independence. He meant to say, I think, that you can't have freedom without democracy. The autocrats in Moscow and the kleptocrats in Mar-a-Lago and the theocrats like Mike Johnson and MAGA are not going to protect your freedom. And the women of America already know that. Donald Trump was, although being personally a sexual libertine who bragged about how his personal Vietnam after dodging the draft was avoiding sexually transmitted diseases in Manhattan, he nonetheless embraced the anti-choice, anti-abortion cause, the theocrats' cause, as part of his political program, and brags about how his three Federalist Society hacks on the court have done his will in terms of abolishing women's right to choose. They've gone silent on it. The cat's got their tongue now that they realize from the people of Kansas and Ohio and all over the country that abortion is a losing issue for them, because this is a country that believes in freedom. But look, the bottom line is that democracy is under attack, freedom's under attack, and so all of the dangers associated with that are present, as well as a threat to democracy and freedom all over the world. Why has the Trump-ruled GOP blown up the deal for aid to Israel, aid to the besieged people of Ukraine, trying to defeat Russian drones and Putin's violence? Why did they blow up the deal that they were seeking for toughening up the border? Well, two reasons. One, Donald Trump didn't want a border solution. He wanted a border problem, a border crisis to work on. And two, if Donald Trump is the fourth branch of government who gets to veto anything the Republicans would otherwise do, Vladimir Putin's the fifth branch of government who's pulling the strings of the fourth branch of government. And Putin did not want $60 billion going to the people of Ukraine, who have the opportunity to win this war against Putin and save us hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars that we will have to spend if he continues his march through Europe, if the next stop is Poland, or who knows where he decides to go. So that's why it's a threat to have him elected, but it's also a threat to have the MAGA clones disrupting American foreign and domestic policy every day.
Yeah. So you're a student of history, you're a scholar of the Constitution, and you are about as astute observer of American politics as they come. And so, you know, when I listen to you, the thing I worry about, as maybe one of those three, hopefully constitutional, a good, reasonably good constitutional lawyer, I hope I am. But the thing I worry about is whether the Constitution is equipped, frankly, to handle a president like Donald Trump. I sometimes think the Constitution was drafted to have George Washington be the president, where you had people abiding by norms, putting the public interest first, and crucially, you had a fierce um, check and balance system of separation of powers, where each branch of government sort of jealously guarded its prerogatives. And it
Yeah.
feels like what you've seen here is Speaker Johnson concede his power to Trump. You have no one of goodwill in the Republican Party, and certainly not Donald Trump. Is the Constitution kind of equipped for this moment?
Well, it is partially equipped for this moment. There's a lot of stuff in the Constitution that if we would only pick it up and take it seriously, we would be able to deal with the menace of Donald Trump. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is a great example of that. The radical Republicans who put it into the Constitution could very well have just said, well, we're just going to deal with this retroactively with respect to the Civil War. But they said, no, the problem of insurrectionism could and will continue in American life. And so we're going to build in a safeguard to say that anybody who gets into office and swears an oath and then violates the oath by engaging in insurrection or rebellion shall never be allowed to hold federal or state office again. And all we need to figure out is how to translate that principle into practice. And the Supreme Court, alas, is completely punting on it. At best, what you can say for their situation is there's some kind of implicit or explicit background deal that Trump will be allowed on the ballot, even though he's disqualified by the Constitution. And in return, for maybe a unanimous conclusion on that, there will be a unanimous conclusion that his fraudulent claims of categorical presidential immunity are rejected. But like that's not how we really should think about a court engaging in political backroom deals like a zoning commission in Philadelphia or something. I mean, we should be thinking about the court actually interpreting the law, but that's precisely what it seems like they're not going to do. So I think another example of that might be the emoluments clause in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8.
Yeah, what happened to that?
Well,
it seemed like he violated that.
Yeah. So you've got a categorical ban. You've got a wall of separation, in effect, built into the Constitution that no president, no federal official can take a present, an emolument, which means a payment, an office or title of any kind, whatever, the founders wrote, of any kind, whatever, from a king, a prince, or a foreign state. And Donald Trump just thumbed his nose at it. But because every other president had respected that basic constitutional norm for more than 2 centuries, there was no legislative regulatory apparatus put into place compelling the president to turn over an emolument within 10 days of receipt and then making Congress pass judgment upon it within 10 days or 2 weeks or what have you. I'm working on that legislation right now. As you probably saw, at least I hope so, Mark, we did a report on the nearly $8 million in documented receipts we've got from China to the different Trump hotels and businesses, from Saudi Arabia, the murderous monarch Mohammed bin Salman, United Arab Emirates, and so on. And that's just a fraction of what he got. But it's just dead to rights, documented receipts while he was president. And all I heard from the other side was, Trump's son saying, well, he didn't even take his $450,000 salary from the American people. I'm sorry, that's all you're allowed to take, okay? You can't trade your salary from the American people for a salary that you get from Chinese government bureaucrats or from, homicidal autocrats all over the world. So that's another example where we just need to act and follow through on what the Constitution saw. But on the other hand, there are things in the Constitution that are just antiquated and obsolete. I mean, the Electoral College doesn't work for us anymore. It's given us 5 popular vote losers in our history, twice in this century alone. It marginalizes the vast majority of voters, as you know, Mark, in every presidential election, because most people live in red states or blue states. And so the whole campaign comes down to Pennsylvania, Arizona, Colorado, a handful of states. That's just arbitrary. It's not because they're big or small or more reflective or less reflective. It's just because of the general breakdown of Democrats and Republicans in those states. They're closer. And so suddenly that's why all of the resources go there, the TV ads go there, the campaigning goes there. And that doesn't make sense. I like something that Jefferson said where he talked about how he deplored the sanctimonious reverence with which people regard the handiwork of the framers, although we don't even do the Electoral College the way they did it. But he said that we should all regard ourselves as founders and framers, and they are no wiser than us necessarily. We have the same capacity that they have to understand what's going on. Plus, we have all of the experience that's taken place in the interim. So I think there's some things that will require constitutional change, but there's a lot of things that we can just do without having to amend the Constitution.
Um, um, I did read your report, and I was referring to why the courts don't seem to have done anything. But I want to pick up on your last point, because I've written and I've spoken out about another norm that has served us really well, and which you were just alluding to about the Electoral College, which is, in lieu of having a national popular vote, there had been a norm in this country for 2 centuries that political parties and candidates want to have a mandate. They want to have the popular will behind them. They want to have a majoritarian support. So even non-majoritarian parts of our Constitution, like the Electoral College, there was a sense. I mean, if you think about Ronald Reagan, there are a few people I had less in common with than Ronald Reagan, but Ronald Reagan was constantly talking about mandates and the American people being behind him. People don't realize this, but Bob Dole in 1970, as a senator, introduced an amendment that would have imposed a national popular vote, because he talked about the importance of majoritarianism, and you wouldn't want an anti-majoritarian system for president. And when George Bush won the presidency in 2000, he didn't celebrate the anti-majoritarian nature of it. I mean, he was happy enough to be president, but he didn't boast about it. Whereas now the Republican Party has become proudly anti-majoritarianism. They boast about how clever they are in winning elections without popular vote, without popular support, whether it's Donald Trump in the presidency, whether it is what we see with Republicans and gerrymandering. It is kind of like their brand that they don't have to win the majority of popular support in order to wield the majority power. And I think that is very corrosive to a political system, both as a political science matter, but also as a legitimacy matter. And I don't see any end in sight for that. And I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Well, it's a great point, Mark. Trump personifies that switch. In 2012, he was denouncing the Electoral College when I think he believed that Romney was going to get a majority in the popular vote, but lose in the Electoral College. And he was saying, this Electoral College makes us the laughingstock of the world. It doesn't make any sense, and so on. And then in 2016, when he lost to Hillary by 2.5 million votes in the popular tally, but eked out the Electoral College victory, and then suddenly he discovered all of these virtues in the system. And you're right, though, because whenever I talk about democracy, one of my Republican colleagues will come up and say, you keep talking about democracy. We're not a democracy. We're a republic. And they think that they've, thrown some knockout punch or something. I mean, a republic is just a representative democracy. And if you look at the history of our constitutional amendments, we've had amendment after amendment transforming our republic from a slave republic of white male property owners over the age of 21 to something far more like a true democratic republic. And, we're never going to be a town hall meeting, direct participatory democracy where 300 million people get in a room together or on the internet together and all decide. We will continue to have representative democracy, I hope, with better deliberation and dialogue than we've got now. But we want our political institutions to be as small d democratic as possible.
So I got to ask you this question, because it has been a matter of some public curiosity. I have my own theory, which is, what the hell do your colleagues actually think? Like, there's two schools of thought. There's a school of thought that says the Republicans that you serve with know that this is all a scam. They know Donald Trump is a terrible person, and they're just afraid. It's what I refer to as the scared MAGA theory. Okay, they are scared of their voters. The second theory is, no, 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 they actually believe this. Like, the crazy things they say, they actually believe. They believe the nonsense that they spew, and they believe that Donald Trump is some kind of unique political figure. You have the benefit that none of the rest of us have, that you see these people when the cameras are not on. You see them in the hallway. You chit chat with them, I assume, on the floor. Which is it? Are they just without any sense of self dignity and courage, or are they just crazy?
Well, it's both. And, um, people ask me this question all the time. So I've given it some thought. I got elected the same night that Donald Trump got elected when I first got into Congress. And so I entered with a lot of Democrats and Republicans who lived through the transformation of our politics with Donald Trump. And at the beginning, there were a lot more people in that first category who were saying this is really strange, and would say behind the scenes like, this is wacky, can you believe, and we could joke about it, we could talk about it. Those people are not really around anymore. Some of them quietly left. I had a friend I liked a lot named Lamar Smith from Texas, who was
Mhm.
the House chair of the Committee on Science and Technology. I put him in that category that I think he knew something was really wrong. It's like, somebody invites you to go away for the weekend when you're in college, and they began to notice, like, some people that, oh, we're really in a religious cult. These people are strange, and they got out quickly, right? Then there are people who hung around and tried to maintain that cognitive dissonance. But here's what really happens: people pass from the first category into the second. In other words, they harbor deep suspicions about what's going on. But then the more they're saturated in the propaganda, the more they say, well, I can see why we're saying that, or I can go along with that. And then pretty soon, you're sleeping on the floor just listening to tapes all night. And I've told my Republican colleagues, I remember when you were a very different person than this. And when we get through Trump and Trumpism and we defeat all of the authoritarianism, and we will, you're going to be fit for doing nothing other than selling flowers and incense at Dulles Airport, you know, because they've completely suspended critical thinking and they've adopted. I mean, look at Lindsey Graham, who
Right.
had fashioned himself the great champion
Yeah.
of NATO in the defense of democracy and freedom against the former KGB chief, Putin. And now he's perfectly fine to go along
Right.
with Donald Trump, who said last week that he invited Putin to go into some European countries and smash things up, just like he's doing in Ukraine right now.
So I have to end with some hope. We are 10 months from the election. The Republicans have made their choice. They're going to renominate Donald Trump. You run one of the most important, I think, and impactful programs, which is Democracy Summer. And this is, for those people out there who don't know, this is an opportunity for high school and college students to learn state-of-the-art tactics about voter registration, political organizing. And so, in my view, and I've had the pleasure of addressing it a couple of times,
Multiple times.
yeah,
You are a favorite.
and to me, why I am so fond of it and why I wanted to talk about it is that it combines two things. It combines real tactics for success with also a hope for the future. You know what I mean? Like, it is a non-defeatist. It is not teaching the tactics of desperation. It is teaching the tactics of effectiveness through hope and the future. And I want you to tell people who are listening to this, who are feeling non-hopeful, who are worried, and are nodding along with you and about fascism, and they just want to know, what can they do? I mean, like,
Yeah.
what is the thing that they can do to help?
Well, I appreciate that so much, Mark. My dad used to say to us when we were kids, when everything looks hopeless, you're the hope. Um, and, yeah, but I long ago dissolved my campaign into Democracy Summer. I spend no money on the polling consultants and TV and radio and direct mail and all that stuff. I, this is a school for young people. It's a democracy school. It's modeled after the Freedom Summer. And Bob Moses, when he was still alive, used to be our first speaker every time. And then John Lewis took over, and we lost him too. I'm hoping Benny Thompson will be able to do it this year. But it's about the civilizing movements of American history and the struggle for democracy, and then the contemporary struggle for democracy, which the young people are part of. The struggle against the gerrymandering, the voter suppression, the manipulation of the electoral college, the filibuster, and so on. All of these anti-democratic mechanisms. I'm with John Dewey, who said the only solution to the ills of democracy is more democracy. What we're suffering from today is the obstacles to democracy, and the kids have got to see that. And there's a lot to deal with that they have a lot of feelings about, in our world. The disaster of climate change, which is upon us, the
Right.
war in Israel and Gaza, terrorism, human rights violations, and so on. We need them on the inside fighting for political power for the forces of democracy and freedom. And that's what, Democracy Summer is all about. I'm hoping we'll be in every congressional district in the country, but we have online seminars with the greatest political and legal and academic actors in the country, including the great Mark Elias. When I introduce him, I say, when I talk to young people thinking about going to law school, and they say, well, would I just end up being at a big law firm? Is that the only thing you can do? I said, look at the career of Mark Elias. Not only does he have the best job in the world, fighting for the right to vote, fighting for free and fair elections, he created the job. He designed it around his own passions and his own vision of the world, And so we have amazing people who are involved in the fight of our lives in 2024, coming to participate with the young people. And then they spend the rest of their week after the online stuff knocking on doors, canvassing, registering voters, building political consensus for a sweeping Democratic victory in 2024. Everything is on the line right now. So thank you for mentioning Democracy Summer, Mark. I'm going to be kicking off my campaign for re-election on Thursday, the 22nd in Silver Spring, Maryland, and also kicking off a new season of Democracy Summer. And my friend Mary Chapin Carpenter is going to be there singing that night. And we have brand new posters and logo for Democracy Summer from Shepard Fairey, who's the great artist who did the Obama Hope poster. So we're going to be unveiling his handiwork there. And we really look forward to your coming back, of course, in the summer and then in the fall of 2024 as we get closer to the election.
Well, I will be there, and I will do everything I can to not only help teach and motivate the students, but also help promote it. Everyone, you can click in the show notes for links to everything about Democracy Summer. Democracy Docket will also be covering it as it gets kicked off and as it moves forward. So please be on the lookout for that. Congressman Raskin, thank you so much for your time, your energy, your expertise, your leadership in the fight, what I think is the fight of our time, the fight of our generation, which is the fight for democracy.
Thank you, Mark, for everything you do. Stay close.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to Defending Democracy. To find out more and stay up to date on the latest voting right and election news, visit democracydocket.com. And please make sure to subscribe to our daily and weekly newsletters. We'll see you next time. Today's episode was produced by Ali Rothenberg, Gabri Corporal, and Paige Moskowitz. It was edited by Paige Moskowitz. Defending Democracy is a production of Democracy Docket, LLC.